Coach Brett or Coach Little Z. You want to wave at them so they know it's you? Okay. And I am technically the doctor. My name is Cindy, and we're really happy to be here with you tonight. Actually, we're going to get to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is STEAM education. And I just want to say this to begin with. When I was teaching school, I didn't spend a lot of time with STEAM, but if I were to start my career over, I would run everything with a STEAM mindset. So I think that it's really important for us to understand that and how it really engages kids because it's all about hands on, minds on learning. So STEAM stands for science, technology, engineering, the A, and I'm going to come back to that in just a second, and math. So usually the A stands for the arts. So the arts could be music, dance, drama, okay, and then actually drawing. But I have heard it be that A be for architecture. I have heard that A be for agriculture. And so because it made sense, I even heard it be an A for aviation. So if you're not in an environment that is big into the arts, or you already have a full-fledged visual and performing arts portion of your program, you might not want the A to stand for the arts. You might want the A to stand for something else that begins with A that you're interested in. So if you enter an agricultural community or you really want to promote gardening, then let that A be for agriculture. And if you have an architect that wants to come and volunteer time, which is exactly what those folks had that called it architecture, then do that. So there's some flexibility, but STEM usually stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. The A is flexible. And there are documents that are called the Next Generation Science Standards, and they are wonderful to read. They're even easy to decode and understand what they mean. And they come they come with physical science, they come with life science, and then they define earth and space science. And if you live in California, there is a fourth one, which is environmental science. So just so you know, this is a great topic, and I look forward to the questions that we have. So if you're listening, if you're on this podcast, please, if you have a question, put it in the chat box so that we can get it. And otherwise, we'll start with some questions that were typically asked. So Robert, you're up.
Hey, real quick, Robert, before you go. So, how long has this been in play? The STEM or the STEAM. How long has it officially been in play in your mind?
So in about 2016, the Next Generation Science Standards were put together. And if you look at standards across the board, like there are English language arts standards, there are mathematics standards. If you look at them, they are all about what the teacher should do. The
Uh-oh, she froze, Robert. Hopefully, I don't have to take over. This would be my.
STEM, if you want the child to have these abilities, this is what the child needs to be able to demonstrate that they can do to apply what you've taught them.
So, you know what? You might want to say that back half again because you completely went out.
Oh, okay. So, did you hear the part about that the next generation science standards are written for what the kid needs to do?
Yeah.
So what they're designed so that you can help kids through hands-on, minds-on activities learn a concept, a science concept, or an engineering concept, or a math concept, right, or a technology concept, and then they are given things to do to demonstrate that they got the standard, that they understand it, and then they build year after year, right, so that by high school, kids are quite proficient. So it's really pretty amazing. So thanks. I'm sorry I went out. So Robert, what do we have as far as questions?
The first question is, what are the key benefits of integrating STEM into youth programs?
So if you don't mind, Brett, I'm going to take that one first, and then I'll pitch it to you.
Well, hopefully you take them all for a long time. This is, I would be saying of the 7 to 10 subjects overall, this would be the least of what I know about.
Okay. Well, I will tell you, there's a part of this that you know a huge amount about. You just don't know it yet.
Yeah.
So look, if when you put in STEAM into your expanded learning program, you are building in, it just builds in all of the things that you want kids to learn. So first of all, it's learning by doing. It's not learning by lecture. It's not learning, not that you can't talk to them. It's not learning by video, although they can watch one. It's learning by doing, it's investigating. And it's doing an investigation more than one time so that you can see if the results you got were an accident or an anomaly. So that's the first thing. It's hands on, minds on. I have seen kids so engaged and learning so much by building towers, building ramps, doing all kinds of things in engineering, actually doing strawberry DNA, right? Which you can extract quite easily. And they're amazed by that, right? As well as looking to see what happens when you add a base and an acid. So there are all kinds of things that they are learning. They learn about the solar system. So, and then they learn about not only with DNA for themselves, but how do plants grow, all of those things. So it's really about exploring the world that you can see and experience. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it really develops your ability to collaborate, because almost all of this work is done in small groups. So there's a group of you. And so above whatever it is that you're learning, so for instance, if I'm having you build a ramp so that you can learn about slope, right? Then above that, I'm also having you learn about working collaboratively, about agreeing and disagreeing with people in a respectful way. But I think almost most important of all, it's about inquiry. It's about asking meaningful, thoughtful questions. And Brett, I think that that's one of the things that you are just outstanding at, is asking meaningful and thoughtful questions. And that is really totally germane to a STEAM learning environment, because it's all about the questions you ask, and asking the first question and then asking a deeper question and a deeper question. So I don't know if you want to talk about inquiry, but that's something that I believe that you are gifted at, that you could share with the folks.
Yeah, so maybe, but I think that, I mean, everything's teachable, right, in life, but some things are just, you have a natural God ability to do. And I think that that was something that was more natural for me. And usually I'll try to take what I do naturally and I'll enhance it by the science, so to speak. So we call it the art, whatever, you bring to the table talent wise, and then we try to enhance it. So I'm pretty intuitive, and but I enhance that with the science of body language. So I read body language, and I've taken a bunch of courses on that, and so on and so forth. But the problem is that when you talk about asking the next question, the next question, the next question, a lot of that kind of depends on where the conversation is going. And I think that we see that all the time, that if it becomes, a little bit more robotic, so to speak, then what happens is that you're not really listening, because the first thing you have to do to be able to ask great questions, you have to listen. Well, I have what I call an echoic ear, which is like a photographic memory with the eyes. I have it with my ear, and that is very rare. So if we look at, probably the learning styles, I don't know what the new ratios are, but most people are visual. I think the kinesthetic learning is going way up because we're on our phones and doing different things like that. And so then you have the hearing portion of that. And so mine is just already up at a very high level from just a talent perspective. And then when you add in the body language and the different things of that nature, it really enhances. And so because I'm able to listen really well, I'm not sitting there trying to formulate what the question that I'm going to ask. I'm really listening, and then I can do that. And if I was formulating, nobody would ever know. Whereas other people, when they're formulating and they're not really listening, you can see them and they're getting real hyper and they want to say and they want to go. And it's like, hey, dude, relax, listen, speak first to understand and then to be understood. But the other thing that I think that it does, two things. One is this: it's so funny how I never really thought about it when I was in the middle of it. But these things that come around a little bit later in education were naturally already there in sports, right? You had to work together. You had to question the next move. You had to do all of these things that you were just talking about. And so it's like it's so natural in a sports, arena, so to speak, to do those things. The other thing that I like about STEAM or STEM would be I think it enhances the critical thinking, the problem solving, the
Mhm.
being creative, right? And so you don't think about like when a kid's throwing it behind his back or underneath his legs when he's dribbling, that this is the creative process. But you have to be extremely creative at that. And you have to practice it over and over and over again. So if you're practicing inquiry, you're practicing how to question, you're practicing active listening, you're practicing these things. Well, guess what? Sports brings that to the table. I don't know how many free throws I've shot in my life, but it's in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. And then I could do it with my eyes closed and still make it too, because now that body rhythm is being able, to help that through. The other thing that I want to say is that I think that because it is hands on and minds on, that it really encourages curiosity and lifelong learning, right? Because that's how we want people all the time. We say
Mhm.
that, especially in after school programming, but anything that has to do with education, that this is the practicing ground for the real world. And so I think that this approach brings that to life, what we should have been doing all along. And I think naturally the sports arena just happened to do it for a long time before people knew it.
Absolutely. And sports is about life science, right? Fine and gross motor skills, being able to, do certain moves. It's understanding how your body works. And I think that that's important to understand that uh, sometimes people like me aren't as coordinated, right? So I have to go back and I have to learn certain skills and learn certain science parts of it so that I can do the task. And so I think that it's just really important to understand that STEAM and STEM, whichever one you want to go with, is about you interacting with the real world. It's you in the real world. I do want to share this one story. I have a dear friend, and her husband is a physics professor, and he got this huge grant to go and study. And this will sound weird, but they had done certain experiments in physics, and they were kind of like routine experiments that you introduced kids to when they were younger and then early in college, and they always had gotten the same results. And then something happened, and suddenly they weren't getting the same results, and they didn't know what was going on. So he was given a grant to go and study what had happened that changed this typical physics experiment from ending up the way it was. And he worked for 3 years on it in a cave in Washington State, where they could control the environment naturally. And it was really interesting because until then, if you said we're going to do blah blah experiment, and I don't remember what it was, everybody knew what the answer was going to be until it wasn't. And that's the value, because the world does change and we live in an ever changing environment. And so sometimes the things we knew before remain exactly the same. And other times the things we knew for sure aren't the same anymore. So that's what the advantage of learning how to ask questions, learning how to problem solve, learning how to think creatively comes into play. And if you don't ever practice that, you're not going to be good at it when you need it. So I just think that if you're doing STEM or STEAM with kids, yay for you. And just try and do that with open-ended questions and wonders. I wonder, I wonder what'll happen if we do this. What else might we do? What do you wonder about? So that you're building that wonder and curiosity. So that was kind of a long answer, Robert, but for me, and I think based on what Brett had to say as well, there are huge benefits for youngsters when you have an active STEAM component in your expanded learning program and in the school day, right? It's important everywhere. So, do you have a second question for us, Robert?
Yes. Second question is, how can I make STEAM activities engaging for all learners?
This will sound horrible, but get out of the way. Uh, Too often we are so attached to outcome. We want we read about this experiment, we read about this investigation, and it's supposed to go A, B, C, D, E. And that's what we want it to do, right? So we over control that instead of saying, what do you think might happen if? And just put it out there. And that engages a young person from the very beginning because it's not prescriptive. Otherwise, I'm just going through the motions to prove what you already know. You already set it up so that I'm going to do steps 1 through 6 and get this result. So, what you want, I believe, in a STEAM activity, a strong STEAM activity, whether that's in science, technology, engineering, arts, or math, is to not have a specific outcome that has to look a certain way. Because what you'll find is that kids do it all kinds of ways and it works. And then they can start to refine and learn from each other. They can go and ask questions. So, oh, wow, whoa, how did you do that? That's not anything we thought of. Well, what would happen if you incorporated that with your idea? How could you collaboratively come up with a stronger idea? So I think when we look at that, engagement is because I can take initiative and ownership. So when you look at an engagement continuum, there's showing up, there's being present, there's that beginning of engagement when I'm going to do what you ask me to do. But to get all kids involved, you need to have them be able to take initiative with the project and then take ownership of it. So when I say get out of the way, yes, bring in the materials. Yes, bring in something, an idea for them to do that's pretty broad and open. And then get out of the way and let them figure it out and then have them share out what they've learned.
Yeah, there was. I had about 10 things coming to my mind. I should have been writing them all down, but just like the start of holistic instruction, or what I call inclusive instruction. State the objective, this wide whatever, and then move out of the way and let them go to work on it. So that was the
Absolutely.
first thing I thought of. The second one was, and I forget, I think you and I were either in the same training, or I know that you and I both listen to a lot of different people or read books about different things. I remember when it was somebody's kid dropped the milk, and the mom went down in on the ground and started just playing with the milk, whereas most parents would be upset with the kid for spilling the milk all over the place, and discovering and the inquiry and all those different types of things. And I don't know if it was the same training or a different one, where the guy had a stepson, and the stepson was supposed to make sure that he did all of his chores and different things of that nature. Well, what happened was, in this case, that he had not done those. So he was running around outside. They lived on a farm, and he got his feet wet. And so what happened was, when he got in the car, which was the last chore that he had to do for the day, he goes through the garage. And so you're going to be upset that your kid just ran through the garage. But what this guy said is that, hey, I need to make sure that we have an understanding here. And he went through this whole, story of the way that he rolled, so to speak, right? And he said, so when you're done being upset with yourself, I need to, make sure that you figure out how, the way he said it was great. He goes, how we get back to having a garage, because currently I have a carport, right? And so because of those, both of those touch points, which is the big thing that I want to bring to this. So we've been talking about touch points, but when this question's asked, I think that if you bring these touch points, these stories and different things to the kids, something that they can relate to, Foursquare, Tetherball, whatever the case may be, it helps them to latch on and to be able to connect. And on a side note, the kid that he did that with wound up running part of the East Coast for garages, right? And so, when you take a look at that, I think that's an extremely big deal. The other thing, which you already had mentioned, but I just want to second, is making sure that things are as hands-on as possible. And then what are the multiple entry points into the dot, dot, dot? So for me, the entry point would have been sports or the Bible. For somebody else, it may wind up being whatever that is for them. It may be through the arts. It may be through science. It may be through math. It may be through, you fill in the blank. So I think that, when you're stating that objective for them of what they're going to need to accomplish, not what you're going to accomplish, again, get out of the way, but what they need to accomplish, but you state that objective and then bring in possibilities of multiple entry points so that they're really thinking outside of that box, because we know that's what life is about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just couldn't agree more. And it's, you engage people by letting them learn, right? It's not scripted. And as much as you can, you have to let them do. And yes, I do remember the story about the milk. And can't you see a kid being so relieved, right? Whoa, what's going on here, right? And that learning to explore and be curious and making, what is that saying? Making lemonade out of lemons, right? It's the lemon that the milk spilled, but it's lemonade when you can actually do something with it.
Right.
Okay,
And with
Robert.
that mentality, how much fun did they both have? And
Absolutely.
how much closer do you draw to your child versus yelling and screaming or reprimanding them or, disciplining them because they dropped the milk? It's the word accident is the word by nature. That's what it's called, an accident. They didn't do it on purpose, for goodness sakes.
Right. Well, and you know what? Either way, you have to clean up the milk, right? So you can clean it up and be mad, or you can clean it up and have had a good experience from it. Okay, Robert, do you have another question for us?
Yes.
Or
The
maybe
next,
from the audience?
I have one more question. The next question is, what strategies encourage problem solving through STEAM?
I think the most important thing you can do is ask open-ended questions. So when you ask a question of a child that gets you a yes or no answer, that is not a good question. A yes or no answer, I mean, I'm not saying it's never okay, but by and large, when a child can answer you yes or no, you've ended the conversation. The conversation's over. There's nowhere to go. There's no thinking that has to happen. But when I ask you an open-ended question, then I encourage you to step up and to start thinking. So an open-ended question would start with the word what or how. I think why is one of those words that nobody knows why they do what they do. I don't. There are a lot of times I do something and I think, why did I do that? That wasn't very smart, right? That wasn't very efficient. That wasn't very effective. I don't know why. At the moment, I thought it was good, right? But in reflection, not so much. But when you ask a question, what were you thinking? How do you think you might go about that? What you do is open up their minds. So Socrates, who was one of the greatest of teachers, he always answered questions with questions. And it's like we're hardwired to answer. Now, you can be absolutely hardwired to answer the question, what time is it? Because it's pretty straightforward. It's either 6:15 or it's not. But when we ask those questions that are closed, when what we're trying to do is open up their thinking, then we don't get what we want. So asking questions that start with how or what, and then let's say that you're working with a group of kids and they're just not getting traction. Nothing's happening. They just are spinning and spinning, like you know how that little blue circle does on your computer, which drives me crazy, and it's just going and going. Then ask the question, what do you think would happen if, and give them a possible solution. But you've still asked it in the form of a question so that they can take that and interpret it their own way. So I think inquiry is incredibly important if you're going to move the needle forward. But I think that's important in reading. I think that's important in math. I think that's important in social studies. I think it's important in life. I mean, I just think it's important to learn to do that. And it's especially important in STEAM.
Yeah, I just wrote down a few notes as you were talking. And so what I would call that is the approach, right? Starting with this growth mindset and then asking these open-ended questions. And again, if you put what or how in front of it, it's going to work out really well. And what I also try to say to them to add to that party, what you were saying, or to the mix, is if they don't have to verbally respond, that was probably a poor question, right? If you say did, right, and for those of you that are just listening, I'm just shaking my head. I don't have to respond verbally. I'm just shaking my head, or I can shrug my shoulders, or do all these other nonverbal things. So I always try to ask really good questions. But when I after I ask the question, I go, wait a minute, could they respond non-verbally to that? If so, I didn't ask a very good question. But I think that's a good trick of the trade, or best practice, what I call peak practice, to be able to put a what or how in front of it and make sure that then it will be the open-ended part of that. I think that the other part that you were talking about really hit with me as well, and that's the iteration process, right? So and I think if you encourage that, and it's iteration number one, number two, and you continue to refine that, eventually you're going to get to something that's probably pretty powerful. But what we expect as adults is it has to be right on the first time. And it's like, that's ridiculous. How much stuff do you get right on the first time? I think about, my first job. I was terrible for the first 2 weeks. But because I was able to have that mindset and that approach before this was even, thought of from my mom, right? Dr. Cindy Zandis, I was able to take everything and question it. And I was always saying, okay, what did I like? What did I dislike? What am I undecided about? Those weren't the words that we used back then. That's the words that we use now. And then based off those likes, then great, let's continue down that path. And it continues to refine and get a little bit better or different. Doesn't always have to be better. Sometimes different's cool, right? Like I think about stuff, and in our reflections, we say confirmation, tweaks, and ahas. I'm like, I never knew that before. I thought that everybody cut their peanut butter and jelly sandwich in diagonals. And I thought that was just the law because that's how my aunt did it, or my mom did it, or whatever. And then yet when you start to do that iteration process and refine that, you find out, does it really matter? It's all going in the same spot, meaning somebody's stomach anyway. So who kind of cares with that, so to speak? So I really liked what you said there. And I think that the last thing, as far as going back to mindset, again, and you said this, but I say it a little bit differently. We're saying the same thing. This is the practicing ground for the real world for them. And if you have that mindset, then you say, okay, well, I'm going to go do it for them. Yeah, well, really? Do you plan on being their Siamese twin and attached to their hip when they're 40 years old? If so, you go right ahead and continue to do things for people. Go ahead and direct and tell them, or do it for them. Enable them. But if you think you're not going to be around, and I promise you, you won't be, or if you do, that's a little bit strange, so to speak. And what you need to do is get them thinking and state the objective, and then put the problem solving back on them, the critical thinking back to them, the reverse engineering back on them.
Absolutely. And what you're doing is encouraging trial and error. So when you talk about, did you get it right the first time? No, I refined it, right? Sometimes it's not even in the ballpark, and other times it's kind of in the ballpark, right? But we're always trying to do trial and error. And, I think that we don't understand that part of the way you learn is through failure, through having it not work. And what I love about fail is I read this on a sign, and it says fail, FAIL, stands for first attempt in learning. And that is what it stands for. You're not done. You're only done if you quit. But as long as you keep learning and you say, okay, that didn't work so well, what else could I do? You're still in the learning trajectory, which is exactly what you're trying to get for kids. And so that can happen because back to the ramp, right? If my arm's the ramp and I tilt that ramp up If I put one book underneath, the car will go a certain distance. If I put two, right, I'm going to learn things. At some point, if I do it at 5, I'm going to have a car wreck, right? But okay, so we've tried different sizes of the ramp. But what about if we covered the ramp with aluminum foil? How would that be different? How would it be different if we covered the ramp with sandpaper? Right? What would happen if you made the car go through a tunnel? What would happen if you let the car go out on sandpaper or carpet or linoleum? There are so many iterations that you can do with the same investigation. And what you do is on day 1, the investigation looks like this. Then on day 2, you just add an increment of meaning and ask another question. What do you think would happen if you did this? And you allow them to continue. And at some point, after you've done 10 or 12 of these ramp projects, they're going to go, okay, if I'm going to build a ramp, I think the best is with a slope of 7% or less, so it doesn't wreck. I think that we need to make it be as straight as possible instead of curvy. Right, they're going to come up with that. And that's going to help them become problem solvers, because they're actually solving a problem, not in a one and done. It's not one and done. It's multiple iterations of the same challenge with just one more little nuance, which is really about current best thinking. If you think about that, you know something, and then you learn something new, and now you have new thinking, and you learn something new, you have more new thinking. And we need to encourage that. And we need to encourage kids to go back and persevere and think about what they learned and how to apply that to a new challenge. So those are the advantages that you get with STEAM learning. And like I said, if I were going to be starting my teaching career now, my entire classroom, everything I did would be related to STEAM in some way, or to that STEAM approach. Maybe not to just the STEAM content, but to the STEAM approach, for sure. We would do an experiment and then do a writing project about it. We would do an experiment and then we would go and we'd learn more about it and find out what other people had learned. I would do that differently, because I believe that that is our best hope for being prepared for the disruptions that happen in our life. For instance, AI is a disruptor. And we have to know how to use it and how to handle it. So that was a slight digression on AI, but I don't know if you want to add anything more. If not, we'll just go to a new question.
No, I was just thinking about when you're talking about the slope. I had a comic, I collect sports cards, as you guys can see here, and comic books and stuff. Well, in my office / man cave, if that's what you want to call it, I had put the comic book up. Well, it was sloped like this, and I was like, okay, go back to, day 1, and you just go, put some stuff underneath there to make it even, because I want to put more stuff on top. So I was just laughing when you were talking about that. I was like, I just experienced that about 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to learn about that, right? You learn to flatten it out, and they need to do that. Okay, Robert, you're up.
Yes, the next question is, how do I incorporate hands-on learning into STEAM education?
I think that it's incorporated. If you don't think that STEAM education is about you turning on a video and letting kids watch something, and that's as far as you go. I'm not saying you can't ever use a video for kids to, I see, right? But if that's as far as you go, or if as far as you go is a textbook, or if as far as you go is you lecturing, then you're really not doing STEAM. What you're doing is your thing. And what we know in a reverse classroom, and there's been a lot of research around this, that what happens is that you lecture, okay, here's the lecture, here's the notes, and then you give them homework that they're supposed to do without you. And about 80% or higher don't know what they're supposed to do. And so what they do in a reverse classroom is they give you the lecture like on an on-demand video, and you watch it. And then when you get to class, what you're going to do is the hands-on, minds-on stuff that you need to be able to do, that somebody then can ask that very poignant question that help you go, oh, right, that gives you an insight because it's forced you to think, that is far more productive because people can listen to the content anytime. They don't need to be with you to listen to the content. The content is the content. That's on demand. But what they need is an actual learning experience to make the content real. And so to me, that is how you incorporate this hands-on, minds-on learning in STEAM. You give them the opportunity to try it out and to say, huh, I didn't know that, right? You can make balloon cars, balloon car rockets. You can do tons of stuff. You can do volcanoes. You can make lava lamps. I could go on. And it's all about trying it different ways until you figure out which way you like best, which got you the best results as far as you're concerned. So that's what I would say as far as incorporating. You incorporate by letting them do it, not talk about it.
Yeah, so, and I would say use everyday materials. You can do experiments, you can do projects, create tangible learning experiences. Again, going back to the sports part of things, it was naturally built in for us, right? So it was real easy for us when this concept came out, or even back in the day, let's say it was mathematics. We would say, okay, and this was in Hoosiers, one of the great all-time movies in my estimation, where I think there were like, I don't know, 100 people in the whole town. Well, they're going to a state championship in Indiana. And so they go to the big Coliseum where they've never even, I mean, the Coliseum or the place where they're playing is bigger than their whole town, right? And so they go in there and there's 25,000 seats. And the coach says to them, hey, I need you to put little guy on your shoulders and I need you to take this down to the ground. And what does it say? And it's from the rim to the ground. It was 10 feet. He said, I think you'll see these same measurements in your home gym in town. And then he went to the free throw line and did the same thing. And he says, what does it say? He goes, 15 feet. He goes, I think you'll find these same measurements. And so as the little guy walks out, he kind of smirks, because they're getting in their head saying, look, it's just a basketball court. Don't worry about the big auditorium and all this stuff. Don't worry about the gymnasium being, twice the size of your whole town. And so I think that, again, it's built in these types of things where you can do mathematics or you can talk scientific stuff on the arc of a ball. So most people don't know, but if you go and you just sort of stand there and you could actually drop two balls into a basketball net at the same time. Most people don't believe that. Well, if you're shooting flat and that arc's not good, it's not going to go in. So what you want to do is put a high arc on it, and then it's going to go in because, again, it gives you the chance to have two basketball go in when it's here. So I think that the approach, when you talk about STEAM or STEM, maybe they should have just called it physical education because that was the approach of what we did and how to work together and how to iterate. This play isn't working exactly right, so we need to twist and change. Or I remember when I was shooting, my elbow was out too far, and somebody said, get that elbow because now that's going to be in line. Drive it up to your eyeball, right? Stuff that we wouldn't necessarily think about. And so we're letting them shoot however they want at first. My own personal son, just like you were saying earlier, I didn't tell him what to do. He was shooting with two hands for most of his young career. And then he wound up shooting left-handed, and he's a right-handed dude. But who cares? It worked out for him, and he was making hoops, so to speak. So I think that PE does a lot of these approaches naturally, and I think that they just work, right? I think if you were to really break them down, they work no matter what the subject matter is. So an approach or a system or a process or a procedure can work in multiple different areas in people's life and help them to make those connections for themselves.
Absolutely. And when you bring out robots, right? Because some kids are really into that. And you give them an opportunity to try and program them. You bring in a drone. We had one program that we were working with, and they did drones, and they mapped the school and they mapped the neighborhood, and they did all that. It was practical, and they got an opportunity to do something they would never have gotten to do before. So sometimes you can bring in those things as well as doing simple, cooking is a science class. It's also a math class because you have to measure, and you get to eat it at the end. I mean, what's better than that? And so giving kids that opportunity. How come popcorn pops? Why does that happen? What's the temperature? How do you, right? There are so many things that you can do that we don't even think about as having to do with science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And engineering is great fun. There are so many things you can give kids to build. And you can have, you were talking about easy to find and inexpensive supplies. For sure, ask kids to bring in the recyclables. They're free. Cardboard makes a wonderful ramp, right? Cardboard does lots of things that you can do that are really cool with it. And they can do that by bringing in
breakdancing too. Do you remember that when I was a kid?
Yes, I do.
Spinning around on my head and stuff.
Yes, you can bring in the arts, right? So what you want to do is get kids to bring in those things, right? And then you can use them. Bring in the leftover straws. I think you could have a good time to see what would be the best way to hit a catch-up packet to see how far you could make it shoot, right? And that might be a little messy, so you might not want to do it on carpet, but you could do it outdoors on paper, right? I think that's kind of like playing in the milk, right? Because haven't you ever looked at that packet and wondered if you just went, what would happen? You just hit it? Well, find out. That's what you can do in STEAM. Just find out, why does it do that, and did it make a difference, right? So I think it's all about that. You do know that you can do coding, maker spaces. Maker spaces just have to have a bunch of stuff. Now you can buy them, maker spaces, and spend a truckload of money on it, or you can just make one out of recyclables. If you've not watched the video Kane's Arcade, you need to do that. It's on YouTube. Kane is now probably 16 or 17, but he did this video when he was 8. And he had to go in the summer, when school was not on, he had to go with his dad to his auto shop. He had a parts store. He did that for automobiles. And he was bored, right? So he made his very own arcade out of the stuff that was easily available to him. And he made all these games. And some of them were simple, some of them were much more complex. And a customer came in and was more impressed with Kane's Arcade than he was with the dad's part store. And so he happened to be a broadcaster, and he broadcast that. And he said, we're going to have Kane's Arcade Day. And people came and paid money to play this kid's game. All of them done from his head, from his imagination, and the opportunity to take advantage of a maker space. What's available to him, not something that he had to go buy, just the pieces of things that were there. So you don't have to buy an expensive maker space, but you can create one with the kids, having them bring in recyclables. I think that I'm done now with that question, but you can go on, Brett, if you'd like to.
No, it just the screen completely blanked out.
Oh,
so I go, uh-oh. Did you guys hear me say uh-oh?
Nope.
Oh, well, there you go.
You had an internet glitch. Maybe it's the weather. Who knows? Okay, Robert, something else.
Yes. What strategies support girls and underrepresented groups in STEAM?
What strategies? What? You blanked for me.
Yes. What strategies support girls and underrepresented groups in STEAM?
There's a program called Girls in STEAM, and it's free. You can do things so that you can actually encourage girls to be willing to get messy, to be willing to experiment and try things out. And what they've discovered is that by encouraging that, so maybe at your school, I'm not saying you want to, if you offer it for girls, you have to offer one for boys in the same way, or you can have girls teams work on it, or anybody that is underrepresented. So there is a great free program, and young people in high school put it together, and you can access it online. It's called STEAM the Streets. And what they do is that kind of thing to encourage people who do not normally think of themselves as a scientist or an engineer or anybody who can do things with technology. And certainly they're not a mathematician. It teaches them that it's all around them and they're doing it all the time. So I think that we have to open up the doors, but I think we also need to understand about being culturally appropriate. And in doing that, you need to understand the culture of the people that you're working with. So when we used to send our kids to Camp Keep, sixth graders went to Camp Keep for a week. We had kids who were not allowed to go because their parent was afraid for them. So what we had to do is encourage parents to come along with their kid and participate so that they could go back and tell the community, hey, it's really safe. So I think that when you're working with a community, if they're to the beach, it's kind of hard to want to let your kids go to the beach all by themselves without you. So I think we're echoing now, but you know what I'm saying? So what you do is you provide opportunities, but invite parents in so that they can see that it's safe and that it's going to be okay for their kid. But I think that you can find programs that will say, Girls in Science or Moonshot or whatever that you can give to your kids that will be helpful for them. And using recyclables is helpful because they're not going out and buying anything and they can fiddle at home as well.
Yeah, I
So-
like that. And, bringing in, let's say, female role models that do those types of things because it breaks through the stereotypes and or maybe from a cultural perspective, you could do that as well. The other thing, too, which may not be as popular as it was way back in the day, but we used to do competitions. And so we would do the girls versus the boys, and we would say, okay, make a structure that, and we can put books on there to see, who can hold the most books or, different things of that nature. And so the girls would be on one side and the boys on the other. And boy, that got really fun because there was a lot of competition going back and forth. And of course, the girls didn't want to be showing up, and neither did the boys. So it really brought out the best, so to speak. Now you have to watch it on the other side, and more in this day and age than you had to when I was teaching back in the dinosaur days. But we found out that that was another way to do that. Would that still be appropriate, GMA, or is that frowned upon more nowadays?
Well, no, they have programs that are just designed for girls, but if you do that, you just need to also do one that's for boys. But when you were talking about that, if you had a competition, girls versus boys, okay, or you had a competition that started with mixed teams, and then you put them to the other. So like if you started girls versus boys and then you put them into a mixed team, or you started with a mixed team and then put them separated from girls to boys, then what you would find is that they will look at it differently, and that's okay. And what you want is to say, hey, it's okay that we look at things differently, because that's how we get the very best out of us. So I think as long as you provided, equity is a big deal and inclusion's a big deal. But equity means giving you what you need, and inclusion means helping you to feel like you belong. And sometimes you feel great belonging to a mixed group, and other times you would really just like to be either with the girls or with the boys. And that's okay, but you need to talk about it. You need to say, how is that better for you? And I think that we want to be really careful, again, to not be attached to an outcome. If you're attached to an outcome, then I have to be able to deliver in the medium, in the way that you want me to deliver it. Whereas if it's more open and I can have input and do it in a way that makes sense to me, then I am going to be more productive. And I think sometimes with activities, so for instance, there's a great activity that you can do with straws and tape. And you tell them to build a structure using the straws and tape that will hold a whatever, fill in the blank, something on the top. And if you just start with that and you don't have them think about it in advance, then what you're going to have is a bunch of people that are frenzied in activity, building the structure with straws and tape. And when they try and put a book on it and it doesn't hold, they'll just add more straws and more tape. But if you have them stop and take a breath and go, okay, what do we need to make this look like? How should we design it so it's going to do what we want it to do? Then you're also helping them to think like an engineer, which would be Howard on The Big Bang Theory, instead of just a person who's in a flurry of activity trying to do something without thinking it through. So I think that that's also important, that you get them to slow down. Okay, what do you want this to look like in the end? How will you know you were successful? What does that tower have to do? Well, it needs to be freestanding. So all I said to you was you need to build a tower that can hold something. That was the challenge. And you can use whatever materials, or I can limit the materials. But then you have to say, okay, if it's 18 inches tall, we'll have been successful. If it'll hold the baseball, it'll hold the book, it'll hold whatever, we will be successful. If we can use 200 straws or less, we'll be successful. And so then they've set their criteria for success. Then they go out and they try and do that. Okay, is it possible for you to build an 18-inch tower using the materials you chose that will hold a book on top of it? I don't know. Will it? You'll have to work that through, and then you'll have to keep tweaking it if it doesn't work. And you might have to go back to the drawing board altogether, but that's all right. It's an iterative process of learning.
Real
and so
quick,
I just,
before
yeah.
we get to the next question, I was watching a YouTube short the other day, and I believe it was a pretty well-known college, and it was a bunch of engineering kids, and they had to build a structure where it would hold a person. And
Mm-hmm.
they were all breaking, and eventually they figured it out. I thought, wow, that's impressive, right? She was a small girl, so but still,
It held
to
her.
be able, to build a structure like that was amazing. Anyway, not a big deal, but I was thinking about that when you were talking.
No, but that's true. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember when we were at Yale at MIT, when we were in Massachusetts, and we were getting ready to cross this bridge that is in the college, and we see this group of kids, and we see this kid laying down, and they put a mark, and then he gets up and he goes and he lays down again, and then they put a mark and they go to, and we said, what are you doing? And they said, we're measuring the bridge in Kevin's. And their first challenge in their science class is to measure the bridge in a way that it's never been measured before, right? And so you have to figure that out. And you can go and look at the archives to see all the ways that it's been measured before, but they were measuring in Kevin's because Kevin's had never been the measurement before. And so, that gets you to start thinking outside of the box, right? You're not looking at it the same way. You go, oh, well, we could do it this way or this way or this way. And I think that we think that you have to be old to do that. I think that probably the most genius, non-squelched humans are probably third grade and under. Because what we teach them by third grade is that you need to be good, you need to fall in line, and you need to do what we tell you. But when you work with a TKer, they have no boundaries. They're willing to try anything because they don't know enough to say, oh, I don't think that would be a good thing. So we just want to give all the kids this opportunity to take initiative.
Guess what?
And measure the bridge in Kevin.
Great idea. You know what we're doing from now on for our companies? We're going to measure them in Robo Roberts.
That's right. Right? But I mean, that's really, and it changes the way the world works, right?
Yeah, new KPIs, Robo Roberts.
Yep. And you could even do it on a teeter totter. And where would you have to sit to create balance, right? If Robo Robert's on the other end, all kinds of things you could do with that. Okay, Robert, I think we have time for one more quick question.
Yes, our last
And
question
we'll
will
try and be quick. I think it's us who's long.
yes, our last question will be how can I connect STEAM projects to real world applications?
I think by doing them, right? Doing them in the real world with real world things, and then asking the question, how could you take what you learned today or this week in this project that we did, and how can you apply it? How can you use what you learned here and apply it to your life as a student and your life outside of being a student? We would call that personal and professional, right? Because a kid's life, their professional life is being a student. But I think that's helpful, because if I don't ever make you think about how you can apply the information, I've missed my chance. Because everything you learn, if you can't apply it, so what? Who cares that you learned it? Who cares that you know that 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue? What difference does it make? What if it was 1493? Does that change anything much? Probably not. But if you take something from that and can apply it, then that learning matters. So that's what I would say. And
Yeah,
Brett,
I would.
we saved
Yeah,
you 2 minutes.
okay. Thank you. You long-winded doctor.
I know.
Yeah, so I would just say a couple things there. So I think that you could take the approach, the STEAM or the STEM approach, just like we talked about, and solve local and or community issues or challenges using that approach. I think another thing you can do, and this is all over the place, is what's the current events, what's trending, and I think that then you can go after that as a problem as well. And as we know, there's a bunch of them that are coming up regular on our feeds and news and different things, of that nature. The other thing that I like is not just a community solve, but partnering up with like local businesses and different things of that nature. I know we tried to partner up with our local high schools. It didn't quite work out, but as us being a business, we really thought that we could help to, foster that. So I think that those are three things that I would take a look at, and you could plug the kids into those, and they can, solve real world problems or real community problems or real current event problems, which may apply directly to them and what they're going through right then. So that would be a big deal for them as well.
Absolutely. And didn't you used to take your kids to 7-Eleven so they had to figure out money, which is a math issue, right?
Every Friday, dude, I lost like 5 pounds on Friday. I had 7 periods where I'd have to walk about a mile there and back. And yeah, we did consumer math, right? We taught them how to do everything, how to have your calculate in your head how much you think it's going to be, add the tax to it, make sure you have your money out so people aren't waiting on you, so on and so forth. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so all of that, and that's math. That's that, and you're right. That's consumer math. That's math that makes sense because you're going to have to do that the rest of your life. So anyway, just want to say it is 7 p.m. Thank you to those of you who attended, and thank you in advance to somebody who's going to watch this without having attended, because it is available on YouTube. We appreciate that. We appreciate you coming, and take good care and have